My topic today is to talk about an old friend, the content editor web part, and its evolution into the SharePoint framework. A few of my recently published solutions. So today we're going to talk about the cherry-picked content web part, which is my flavor, so the cherry flavor of the content editor web part in SPFx. I also circled here the property parent portal, which was the topic I talked about a couple of months ago, if you're interested. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of history. It started with classic SharePoint, and there we have some of those wonderful web parts that we could use to bring any kind of external content and scripts into our pages. So today, when I look at Microsoft 365, there's a lot of those connectors that allow us to enhance the different parts of the platform. So we have connectors for Power Automate, Power BI, for Microsoft Graph as well. And this is kind of how I see the content editor web part, the script editor web part, and also the page viewer web part. These were my connectors that allowed me to bring more to the SharePoint pages at the time. So really, I have used and abused that content editor web part. It started more than 10 years ago when I created some, well, I would say, from my view, very nice functionality like the HTML calculated column and the easy tabs at the time. Now, moving into modern SharePoint, well, unfortunately, I would say for me, the content editor web part and the script editor web part didn't make it. So now we've lost those two web parts. Something new we have is the embed web part, which is kind of a mix between the page viewer web part and I don't know what else the content editor web part may be. It has more restricted capabilities, and for example, scripts are not allowed. But fortunately, we have the SharePoint framework, and this is what allows us to bring back the content web part in a custom form. So there are a few solutions that are available around the web. I mentioned here the script editor web part, which originally was created by, so I'm not sure if I pronounce it right, Mikhail or Michael. So I just learned today that there's a fresh update to that web part. So very nice to hear that this is still alive and kicking. I also had my own flavor, which I call the dangerous content web part, and I'll explain in the next slide what I mean by that. And if you search the web again, you'll find a few others. So this you can, if you're missing the content editor web part, you can have it back with those custom SPFx solutions. Why did we lose the content editor web part? So I'm not sure I have all the explanations, but what I'm hearing from Microsoft, there's a few issues with it. First, there's a security issue. Imagine you get someone who just copy-pastes code from found on the web, and there's a risk of script injection here as a security breach. There's also the risk that the script may be broken, and in this case, it might completely break the full web page. So you lose complete access to the web page, and then you have to go to a backdoor to get it back. And so there's a governance concern here that when you make the content editor web part available, then everybody within the company can have those scripts that are stored anywhere, and you don't really have control on what's going on, how to govern it, and how to maintain it. And somebody leaves, and then you don't know where the script was. Okay, so all those issues with the classic web part, it's exactly the same because the SharePoint framework solutions are trying to replicate that behavior, but at the same time, it's also bringing back the exact same issues. So let's think a little bit what are the solutions we might bring to address this and get a better content editor web part. My first idea was to bring a sanitizer and to the web part. So we remove the unsafe part, or what we don't know, the parts we don't know are safe or not. So that's available. You find some sanitizer libraries are available. It's also something that HTML, the standards are bringing now. It's more in an experimental stage, but it's going to be hopefully at some point part of the HTML standards. So for me, what it meant, I told you about the dangerous content web part, which was my equivalent of this content editor web part. So now we're moving to the safe content web part, which is the dangerous content web part with the sanitizer. Some issues, the sanitizer first, and maybe that's why it's still experimental. We are not sure that it captures all the unsafe parts. So definitely you can remove the script, you can remove the events from your code, but then there are some trickier parts that are really difficult to identify. These kind of script injections, cross-site scripting that I was talking about. So it's not, I would imagine at this point, not 100% reliable. It might be also, even if it works, it might become useless because, well, you had some nice script that did something and you remove the script, then you're left with nothing. So not a big gain here. And you still have the governance question because we haven't changed anything in the way we manage the scripts themselves, the snippets. Okay, so that's what I was thinking about. And then a couple of months ago, I captured on GitHub PnP, I came across that issue that was opened by Mike Zim. So I don't know Mike Zim, but that's the nice part about being part of this community is you can look at what others are doing, you can learn from others' ideas. And Mike Zim came up with another idea that I'm going to talk about because this is the one I implemented, I used for my new solution. Okay, so the simple, I would say, the simple idea here is that instead of working on the technical part of the web part and the code itself, we simply introduce some governance to the web part. And instead of having those snippets all around the place or even in external places, you decide some repositories that you're going to use where you're going to store and maintain these snippets, and you force users into those repositories. So that's the whole idea. It's a governance approach instead of a technical approach. So I would say, well, I love the idea. I would say it's a common approach when you do content management. I have a few examples on this slide. It's also kind of what the current embed web part is doing, where you can choose the locations of different sites you can pull the web pages from. And I put here the issue, so number 2228 on PnP as a reference. Okay, so now we're moving to demo time. So let me show you. And so I built that web part based on that ID, and I called it the cherry-picked web part, meaning that you only go to those snippets you've been allowed to pick. So I have already built the web part. I'm going to show a little bit of the code very soon, but that's what it looks like. So I'm going to edit mode because this mode is not really useful here. Going to edit mode. And this is the property pane of that web part. And you can see here that when I pick my file, I can only choose from a set of approved libraries. And then when I pick one library, I have that cascading selection. So I'll also show that code, a cascading selection that allows me to pick the code snippet. So the web part, this cherry-picked content web part, it comes with 16 samples. So they are self-sufficient. It means that you can just upload them to a library of your choice, and then you can run them with the sample. So I'm not going to show the 16 of them. I'm just going to cherry pick a few here. Right here, you have the Google map as an example. What would I choose here? So let me show you HTML fragments. So that's something I don't know the exact stage right now of the Markdown web part, but something I struggled a little bit with in the beginning of modern SharePoint was that the Markdown web part didn't give you a lot of layout flexibility. So that's one way to address it. It's to use this new content editor web part. Other example, the countdown here. Okay, so I know we already have a countdown, but this would be a custom one that you can implement. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is that there are two options with the content editor web part. Either you can inject the code directly in the page, or you could inject it in an iFrame. So that's what I mean, and I try to reuse the, hopefully the right way, the SharePoint framework vocabulary. So when it says isolated content here, it means that the content is injected in an iFrame. If it's not isolated, then it's going to be directly injected on the page. So you have the option here to uncheck it and have it on the page. What you can see here immediately is that the text font, the font color changed and from black to white. So that's kind of the point of the iFrame, this isolated content, is that it allows you to avoid any conflict if needed. It allows you to avoid any conflict between the page itself, the scripts and the CSS of the page, and the scripts and the CSS of your own snippet. Let me pull here a few more. So here, for example, I have a banner. Most of my examples, I would say in most of my examples, the iFrame is the preferred way. This is kind of an exception. You see, if I want to insert a banner in my page, here, banner is really at the wrong place because it's at the top of the iFrame. So what I'm going to do is uncheck that box, and then I get the banner exactly where I want it here at the top of the page. So I definitely need to move to the code, but I'm going to show you one more example because it shows something very interesting here. So one of the little additions I made to that web part was to pull. What it does, it passes the context, the web part context, over to the snippet, which means that within the snippet, you can leverage that context. And in this example, you see that I used the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. So I have a lot, well, there are lots of capabilities with the toolkit. I love it. And what this web part allows you to do is take those snippets. So you just go to the snippet of MGT Explorer, and you can take those snippets and you can display them here directly in the page because it's going to pull the context from the web part. Okay, so I'm going to move to the code. So the way it works to make sure that those users are going to stick to the libraries, so in that sample, the libraries are hard-coded in the code itself. In my case, it's just a static list. You can see for the demo, I just added here cherry-picked samples library. You could do it in a more dynamic way, but the fundamental idea here is that the users cannot touch it. It's embedded in the web part itself. And the code checks this list in edit mode. So when you pick the snippet, it relies on this list. And also in rendering time, at rendering time, it also makes sure that the code comes from that specific list. So the code itself is very simple. I'm not going to go back to my slides, but basically what we're doing here is a one-liner. I guess most of you are familiar with the inner HTML property in JavaScript. So it's kind of the evolution of inner HTML that we're using it, which is called, so the method is called create contextual fragment. And this is the magical method that allows you to transform that text fragment into HTML elements and scripts. So just really a one-liner here. A few more things about the code to conclude that presentation. I'm using React Memo here to limit the number of refreshes. So you can imagine that because we are parsing that code, we might have quite a few elements inside here. So React Memo allows me to only refresh the code when the fragment changes, when we pull a new fragment. I was also talking about the property pane. So in my previous presentation a couple of months ago, I showed you how you could kind of bypass those built-in functions that you have available within the SharePoint framework. Here, I did the opposite. I reused the built-in functions. So I have a property pane dropdown here, and I use this to create a drop-down menu and a cascading. It's actually a cascading drop-down menu. So if you're interested in building cascading drop-down menus from those built-in functions, you can check here my code. What's important here is that it's using the onProperty pane field change method, which is a built-in method of the SharePoint framework. So I'm just going to stop here on that image and stop sharing. So this is the iFRame script injection. All right.
Thank you, Christophe. Really, really cool stuff. Absolutely brilliant stuff.